This is the Business Chat Podcast.
And welcome to the Business Chat. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm here with Andy Smith in Rochester, Minnesota. How's it going today, Andy?
Minnesota warm, which is mid-30s. So doing well.
They're throwing around the football and grilling today in Minnesota, guys. So Andy Smith is our guest, a seminary student turned indie theater owner, purveyor of film. Grey Duck Theater and Coffee House is the name of the business. You can visit greyducktheater.com while you're listening to or watching the Business Chat today. Andy, thanks so much for joining and taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about business generally, and of course my business in particular. What kind of small business owner would I be if I didn't take that opportunity, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Well, as I was mentioning to you before we started this meeting, that, you know, the little shtick we like here at the Business Chat, formerly gone by another name that we're just kind of having a good time about here internally, as we like to hear a moment where you get to shine a little light on and give a little nudge to a local brewery, roastery, maker, beverage purveyor of sorts. So what are you drinking today?
Yeah, so I do have my merch here that says, it looks like Business Brew, but it says the Business Chat.
Yeah, let's type both. Yeah.
I am actually drinking our tea that we serve down at the theater. We use a local tea vendor who have been awesome. Mandala Tea is their name. And this is a Dragon Pearl Green China tea, which has been, I should have brought one with me, but they're called Dragon Pearls because they're literally rolled tea, where these little tea balls that are hand rolled by workers in China, every single one, and it's delicious. Yeah. It kind of looks a little bit like pea, but it is a delicious green tea. So that's what I'm using. Mandala is, like I said, a vendor right here in Rochester, Minnesota. So we like them a lot.
Very nice. Thank you for bringing your drink. You know, when we were putting this format together, Andy, we debated should I bring a drink each time, and the challenge of having to drink a craft beer at each interview is it, you know, it's
such a hard life you lead. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it's a real hassle to have to go buy it, to drink it. But we're up to the challenge, and we decided with all these breweries in the LA area, and guests may send them in, that I will join that. So without further ado, I wanted to mention I am drinking Common Space. This is Cool House. It's a delightful little milk stout, which is actually in season for the time of year, but it's way too hot here in LA to be drinking a stout, as it's a stout 80 degrees outside.
Rub it in.
Yeah.
Rub it in.
Yeah, so that is Common Space in Hawthorne, California. You can check them out. Delicious beer. They do a lot of neat stuff. You'll notice their cans out here, at least out west, when you walk by and see just some really funky artwork and some strange names, and that's kind of a thing now in craft beer, right? So great. So we've got drinks. Let's do the virtual cheers to move on with this talk, as it were.
There you go.
Thank you, sir. Great. Well, so we've got our drink, we've got our intro. Andy, again, thanks for joining. What we want to do in this series, you know, is really focus on you telling your story. In my time of both getting guests ready for this show and really before we decided to have this podcast, this video series, there was so many different ways we could approach this from the narrative, right? What to talk about, your vertical, because I'm fascinated by what's happening with theaters and indie theater and film and producing film. But we might be here for a month talking about all those things. So, and I'm good with that, except I think like a lot of things around me might start dying.
Probably no one else will be.
Yeah, I need to go home, you know, wife and kids. So today, what I'd love to hear from you, with minimal interruption for myself, although I will chime in with some questions, and I know a few of our audience members, if I can call them that, early subscribers, are very fascinated with your transition, right? So as I introduced you as the seminary student, and right now a bunch of you are going, that's me, turned indie theater owner, the floor is yours. Just, you got to take me to where you are today with the flyby, and then I'll, you know, interrupt you proper. So
yeah, absolutely. So probably the beginning of the story is my growing up years. So I grew up in the Los Angeles area, I already mentioned, and in the water there's sort of the entertainment industry, as you know, even, you know, greater LA area, you know someone who knows someone, or you know, can go down to LA all the time. And especially me, as someone who already loved film, was in love with that whole scene. So I've always had a great love for cinema, what it can mean, what it does, and how it builds community around ideas and visuals and art and all this sort of very interesting things.
Sure.
And that was born both from where I grew up geographically, but also I always like to shout out a very specific shout out. But Lord of the Rings, the movies, they released an extended edition that actually took people in their special edition, like, special features, whatever, from conception, pre-production, through all of the production steps of a film and post-production. The great example I have is they have a whole section in this DVD about color correction, which is like the most boring thing in audio video stuff. Where are you on the red spectrum? Like, they talk about that on this video. And so I always say, I didn't just love movies, I always loved the movie making process and the industry around it. And so obviously, despite that love, I didn't choose to do that professionally at first. As you said, I initially thought that I was going to be involved in spiritual things, and so I was studying theology. For that, I moved to study at a college in Chicago. It was right downtown Chicago. This is important because it is at this point, while I was living in the city of Chicago, in a very urban setting, that I started to realize that all of these churches, because again, this was this sort of area that I was in at this point in my life, had these beautiful spaces that normally spent a ton of money on great specs, right? Both audio and visual, because that's kind of the world we live in. You have to have that even in, I was going to say the spiritual industry. That's probably not a good word. In the church space. But they were only used once a week, maybe twice a week, right? Like a midweek gathering, maybe, and then on Sundays. And so that was when I started getting into my head using these smaller spaces for something that I was really passionate about, which was movies and film. At that point, I thought maybe just like a pop-up cinema that I would use as part of, maybe a church ministry or something like that, or as a pastor, I would just try to host those every once in a while. So that was like a small idea. As most business ideas, it starts kind of small out there and then sort of grows in the back of your mind for a while.
True.
Fast forward a little more, I graduated from college, went to grad school, seminary, as you said, to work on my master's degree. Did that, graduated, got my master's of divinity, and then took an internship at a church. And it was during that year, again, this is too much to get into as far as the reasons behind this, but basically I decided that was not going to be my career choice, that I was not going to be professionally involved in churches in that way. So that is the same year, so that's 2016, I believe. That is the same year that another important film came along in my life, and that is La La Land, which probably a lot of people know.
Why was that, so we can pause on that. Why was that such a polarizing film? Because it seemed as though people loved it, or I wouldn't say hated it, but were wildly indifferent about it, because I thought that was a fantastic film myself.
I think,
here's a moment where you can show us some of your film critic prowess, because I'm genuinely curious what your take is in 30 seconds. Why was it such in my opinion, I think that was a very divisive film from the critic standpoint.
At the end of the day, I think people looked at that, and there's a certain stigma about Oscar movies, and so it had some of the telltale sides of Oscar movies, mainly being in Los Angeles, about the movie
about
industry.
LA. I gotcha.
And it wasn't the reason I love it. Is it plays with a traditional film structure and how it's filmed and how the story actually works out. Right. It's not really a romance. It's not really a comedy. It's not really a musical. It kind of.
So you're saying, I totally hear you. Yeah. So, and a lot of folks listening who know the movie, love the movie or don't care, or the most popular, hated the ending. So what you're saying is the nostalgia and the blueprint was what set it up to have a bit of a Achilles heel when it came time for awards, right? It was a bit of of course they're going to give this movie the award, but we can't, and that's a little bit of the politics within the Oscars. I won't get into either, but yeah, sure. Okay.
And Damien Chazelle is a young director. And the interesting thing also, the other movie that won that year, Moonlight, is another one of my favorite films of all time.
Sure.
And that was by Barry Jenkins. It's an incredible film by a black man about the black experience, especially as a gay black man. He's not a gay black man, but it's telling the story of a gay black man growing up in Miami, if you've seen Moonlight. And it's a fantastic film. And so, rightly or wrongly, what award season does is it pits pieces of art against each other. I think both of those pieces of art are fantastic, but unfortunately, even in like the entertainment sphere, in the critic sphere, people felt like they had to choose sides, which I think is unfortunate. So I think it was getting flack from both sides, right? People who don't really like artistic / like non-traditional storytelling in movies or whatever aren't going to love it. I always call that kind of my dad side of things, like my dad who watches movies. Not in a bad way, but they like their more traditional movies. And then in the more artsy community, I think people really like Moonlight, and so they chose to sort of So I think that's why it was. But to get back to my story,
get back to why that was pivotal for you. So that film comes out, it's 2017, and
it's interesting because this ties back in because the ending I love in that movie because I don't think I have to be nervous about spoilers. Basically, both of the main characters choose their dreams and what they want over the love they have for each other. They decide their love for their dream is greater than the love they have for each other, and it's simply not going to work out. They're not bitter about it. It's not like a angry breakup, but they choose dreams over whatever else they had in their life.
Yeah, romantic passions and sure. Yeah.
So for me, it challenged me to ask, what are my dreams, and have I gone after them with that same vigor? Not in the sense of like, I'm breaking up my romantic relationships in the exact same way as La La Land, but I really asked myself after watching that film, what could I do if I was doing nothing else, and what's stopping me from doing that?
Right.
And that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't some storybook ending where I sat down and then I had the plan for Great Theater and Coffee House, but I challenged myself for what I was doing in life. After that, I had sort of a pilgrim stage where I was working at a couple different jobs as I was figuring out what to do. I worked as a salesman for a little while, worked as a teacher for a little while. And it was while I was working as a teacher that I started formulating the plan of a small micro cinema. I came in contact with that verbiage, a micro cinema, through finding a guy in New Orleans who had done something similar. And connected with him, talked about it, and started learning about the industry, how I could make this work, what it meant to be a micro cinema. And what I really...
Interesting.
Yeah, so maybe I should go back and say what a micro cinema is. So people are used to cineplexes, right? Most people probably, when you go to see a movie, you go to a big mall, and you go to a huge parking lot, and you go and you buy your ticket, and you go sit in one of the 10
candy's very affordable. It's usually bargain candy. Oh wait, no,
Yeah,
no, that's right. They murder you on that. I'm sorry. I got it backwards. Yeah,
a small popcorn and a spray of soda.
Sure.
So that's how things have evolved, and that comes from the blockbuster culture of the 80s and on through the 2000s, and a lot of money being thrown into the movie theater. I am not a huge believer in that. I think it's impersonal. And I think it takes out a lot of both the sexiness of the movies, but also the importance of the movies and how it builds community, how it brings people together while they experience this artistic piece or this just fun movie together at a time. And so I became involved in something called the micro cinema movement, which seeks to have one theater that is smaller, both in how many people can sit in it, and is locally owned and more curated for the local audience that it's a part of. So generally, even in a megaplex, each theater will sit 200 to 500 people, and there's like 10 different cinemas normally, right?
Right.
My theater that we opened here has one cinema, and we seat at most 66 people. So you can imagine the difference there.
Sure.
But the also important for the micro cinema movement is we love film, and so we don't want to sacrifice quality as far as audio, as far as visual, as far as experience. And so we still have, I don't know if you can throw up pictures or whatever we're going to have in post, but people can see pictures of us on our Facebook and website.
Pictures are showing right now as you're talking. That's right. Yep.
We wanted it to feel big and feel special and feel like an event, but also to be locally owned and have those things. So I came in contact with the micro cinema movement, and then equally important to us was to be able to go to a community that didn't have access to independent movies for the most part. Usually independent movies only show in major, top 50 markets. Actually, I should say top 20 markets, most indie films. Some even don't go further than, top 4. You're, Chicago, LA, New York, and like sometimes Houston, sometimes, other San Francisco. But generally, it's going to stay in those major cities. So our goal was to find a city that had north of 100,000 residents, but also didn't have anything like an independent movie theater.
Right.
Again, this is a long story that we could get into or not get into how you want. And eventually we chose Rochester, Minnesota, which is it's about an hour and a half south of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's famous for having Mayo Clinic, which gives it a very high education level as far as what it is to the mean of Minnesota, as well as yes. And education level is one of the big factors for people going to independent cinema. And yet there wasn't an independent cinema down here. So again, there's a lot of different things I could go into, but it seemed like a really great place to be. And so we came down here. We also had the great fortune of meeting a real estate ownership group that had a spot that worked really, really well for us. And also, to be frank, they really believed in the vision. I sold them on the vision for this micro cinema, why it was important, why it would be good, why would it add value not only to their property, but to the neighborhood that they had invested in heavily, and the city, obviously, that they had been invested in heavily.
Right.
And so that's what the ultimate thing that finally pulled the trigger to actually be here in Rochester. And I'm sitting in that building right now as I record this. It was an old Culligan water facility, and they had a warehouse in the back and offices up front. And so we spent, I think the total at the end of everything was something around $250,000 tenant improvement that they put into this place to make it a movie theater. Both a lot of that was rehabilitating the warehouse to have an HVAC system to be compliant with
modern amenities and those things.
Yep. And the front into what eventually came into a coffee house. That's kind of a different conversation. That wasn't part of our original value, but after coming in contact with some local people, we were able to make that happen. But that is the very short to medium length discussion of how I got from point A to B, that transition you were talking about.
So thank you. That's tremendous. So while you hydrate yourself on your lovely mandala tea there, handmade every day, painstakingly, yes. All kidding aside, that's a tremendous narrative with the tea alone. And just listen to us. There's so many topics. What do we talk about right now? So one thing that I know the audience that's listening is curious about, because, what's in a name, right? So what is Gray Duck? Pause on that for a minute. What's the name about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So when we were thinking about what to name it, we wanted to do a couple things. One, obviously, like every business, you want to sound unique. Both in the technical side, you want to be searchable, but also in the, brand value, you want it to be memorable. Two, we wanted it to communicate what our vision was, which was to facilitate local community. And so we wanted to have some sort of call out to local cinema. We didn't just want to be Hollywood cinemas or, whatever, throw it out there, like Casablanca Studios or something like that. We wanted it to have a reference. And so Gray Duck, if you're not from Minnesota, you might not know the children's game that in every other state is called Duck Duck Goose. Here, because of a weird translation of Norwegian, which is, there's a lot of Swedish and Norwegian influence here in Minnesota, they call that game Duck Duck Gray Duck. And so it's become kind of a fun point of pride for Minnesotans to
it's quirky too. I mean, and I was on your website, I was looking at the brand, I was understanding some of the things that you do with the virtual cinema, and without, again, getting into the pivots and the longer dialogue of a business owner like yourself having to ride out the storm of this pandemic we're currently in. It was interesting to see that no matter what it is you've got there, from an online kind of virtual experience, right, the theater rental, the coffee experience, the gray of the actual website color and the Gray Duck brand, the merch, it's a strong brand. I didn't know how much of that was, like a black sheep thing, right? The Gray Duck, is that a little bit part of that? But you just explained, right? That's a Norwegian kind of a translation breakdown, and I love it. I love that even is a quirk to the area, so it's hyper local, right? I mean, that's something that name would work anywhere, but it's very Minnesota. So yeah, that's killer. Okay. Well, no, and I think the other thing I wanted to circle back on, as you were gracefully, but in a rush, thank you, giving us all the details in the flyby, is take me back to where you saw La La Land. Something about the way that the two characters in the story forsake or they give up or they decide that either option's valid, right? This isn't a love stinks movie. I've seen it. I really enjoy it. And I agree with your sentiment, by the way. I think there's a lot of debate over what the director might or might not be sending. But the point with you and with your story in our meeting today is that for you, it really resonated. And that for you went, I have a passion, right? Seminary, faith-based career decision. And I want to understand a little more cerebrally, without trying to create some narrative that's maybe not there, is do you feel that you found a bit of your, this might sound a little cheesy, but you're still preaching now, right? Like the same drive you had to be very connected to and study theology, which I understand is complex and it's nuanced and it's debated. Film and the misunderstanding and the Cineplex, right? Which is, I'm not saying is necessarily Andy Smith's crusade again. Well, those are mega churches and small, and I'm over here doing that in the theater world. But in a way, it's a really fascinating kind of story. And of all industries you could have bounced or pivoted to, and we've heard them, you and I both, right? Of, hey, this guy was a preacher and did, preachers are good at sales typically. Really, they are, because they're good speakers, they're orators, they're writers, they are sometimes in a good way, and I know a few, in a good way, full of themselves, and it's awesome because there's a personality. You choose to go kind of below the layers and not just get into film as just a critic, which is your mindset. You're passionate about what's being misunderstood, the experience of film, the importance. I love that you highlight that. The question, as I'm rambling to you, do you feel as though you landed in a place where that same passion or that idea for being passionate in theology and in preaching perhaps has arrived in a good place where you go, yeah, this is a calling for me. This is much more of a use of my DNA. Or do you feel like you completely were reborn? What do you feel is the difference anyway? Like, do you think there was just you kind of moving and you kept your passion, or did you have to kind of unlearn one thing and kind of grow into this other thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So it's a buzzword, but it really is, I think, the connecting thread here between my various career choices is I really love community organizing and making communities. And at its best, I think religion is building community of humans around, in that case, it's ideas and a belief structure.
Right.
One of my best friends here in Rochester is another local business owner. His name's Patrick Thielen. He owns a coffee company, actually, the coffee roaster that we use here at our coffee house. He and I talk about this all the time, that there are certain things, and there are only a couple, in the world that are what we call great equalizers. And we mean by that is that all people come to them and can relate because of them.
I see.
For him, his main passion is coffee. That coffee does that, right? People love to drink coffee. People go out on dates around coffee. They have Bible studies, or they have just meetings with friends. All these things happen around coffee, and now sort of this equalizing presence. In England, it's the pub, right? Pub actually originally is a public house because people would go there and it's beer and drinking. And today brewery culture is much the same. For me, I also view movies as that equalizer.
Interesting.
Today, I think movies are the preeminent entertainment experience, right? Sometimes, in the past, maybe it was symphonies. In the past, maybe it was paintings. Those things still exist. People still love those, operas, all that stuff. But most people on the street have a favorite movie, or they've gone to movies, or they can talk about a movie that they really love, or they can at least have the sense to go see a movie really of any genre, and whether they like it or not, they can appreciate certain things of it, or they're ready for the medium. And so it's that community built that people can have connections with, learn, have a fun time with, laugh because of those things. It's a great equalizer. The great critic Roger Ebert always said that films are the greatest empathy machine in the world because they force you to be in someone else's shoes. And that can be for comedic purposes, entertainment purposes, or really important purposes. I mean, I think movies have had an indelible effect on things, I think, from politics to religion to my fashion to, whatever other superfluous things.
Our existence.
And so exactly. And so I love that about movies. And so I want to facilitate that. So we do show films, but we also do several ways of trying to facilitate that conversation. We often have Q&As after our discussions with local nonprofits that are around the ideas that we are doing. Like, just as a fun example, we showed a documentary about beekeeping. There's this great beekeeping documentary that came out last year called Honeyland about beekeepers in Turkey.
Okay.
Obviously, I don't have beekeepers from Turkey in Rochester, Minnesota, but I do have local beekeepers. And so they came in called the Bee Shed, and they literally set up a little booth. They sold some of their honey, and then they had a Q&A about all that they do, why they do the things that they do, what it means to have pollinators involved in our ecosystem. And this is great, learning moment. And I know people in our community who came to that event, and now they don't host bees, but what they did is they planted pollinator-friendly things instead of just a regular lawn, which is harmful for pollinators. So that's just like a small thing that you wouldn't think of, but has impact on the community. I'll say one more example because I love talking about this.
Please, go ahead.
We showed a documentary. I'm forgetting the name of the documentary, but it's about the border wall between Texas and Mexico.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
It's basically an adventure documentary where these guys just try to follow the border, showing how difficult it is, how the terrain is difficult, and why this wall is not really a good amount of money.
Right.
And that it's this beautiful land that should be preserved and not destroyed by man-made buildings. Anyway, things like Big Bend National Park, if you've been to Texas, is just this gorgeous area. And so we showed that, but not only did we show that, we added $2 to our normal cost of $8 tickets. So the top tickets were $10. And those $2 we donated to Raíces, which is a nonprofit that works with immigration families and their legal troubles as they're coming to the United States. And we were able to raise $3,000 because of that. So, and donate that. So I think film makes a big difference in people's lives, and we want to direct that and create a place for that here in Rochester.
Yeah. Wow. And what you basically just said that I picked up on is events, and so whether they are virtual, the conversation exists online for the time being, again, while we're writing out this thing globally, your passion, as you just talk about it, is people getting together. You learn something new. It's educational, but I love the core point is it's equalizing. It's a centering thing to say, yeah, I'll go see a movie. I've seen a movie. Movies just are disarming. The whole topic of a film is, again, it's theatrical. It's a story. It could be based on a real narrative, right? It could be biographical. But as you said, to quote the great critic, it's the ultimate empathy empathy vehicle, rather, so you can actually be in somebody else's shoes. And that's powerful. And when, you're talking about the pivot you made back to your career change for a moment and kind of addressing our listening audience who can be anybody, honestly, but to the folk out there that are thinking through the same kind of thing. They may not be in, seminary, but definitely going, I'm also passionate about events, maybe specifically film. I know the journey that you began as you took that rather sharp pivot, although mentally I think it was leading up to this, to pull out of seminary, kind of tell friends, family, I'm not doing this. They go like this, the shock. Mm-hmm. I'm having to kind of unwind things that I wound up and now turn and face this thing of raising money, of finding a location, of building a brand, getting a website up. And I'll go further with you. It's popcorn machines, it's seats, it's a projector. There's a lot to do. Each thing I just named is an episode. So without doing that, help me understand and help the listeners understand for you, because I saw a lot of this as you and I were talking about this journey. And as we're showing various images now to the viewers that can see the video version of our meeting, what would you say was the most challenging? You kind of went, wow, it's happening. This really is a lot more work, because there's a momentum element, there's adrenaline, and there's things that go well. But what for you was sort of either a speed bump or just a moment of just pure exhaustion or trying to set up the physical building where you really went, this is real. And no one really gave me no one needed to, but there wasn't a briefing that it was going to be like this hard or whatever, So yeah, what was the hardship for you?
Oh man, so much. I will say, from
if you could focus on one, to help people listening. That's right.
The first thing to always recommend, and this is something that should be normalized in sort of our business culture for real, is that like mental health is real. My whole life, I've never had difficulties with stress, even in school, anything like that. And I've been a small business owner now for 3 years. And for the first time, I am on some anti-stress drugs. And I had to go to counseling for a little while. So I was getting overwhelmed with this. So, I mean, there's definitely going to be stress. And for me, actually, interestingly, it's not stress about particular things. It's sort of a background stress all the time.
Sure.
Not anymore. Again, talk to your doctors, go to a counselor. There's help out there. Don't deal with it yourself. But for me, just the overall like tension of having all of this on you really gets to you. But in a more specific sense, I mean, you have to be willing to. I was going to say fail, but that's not. I never really failed. But I mean, like for 8 months. I was living with my in-laws while we were waiting for renovations to be done. Like my wife and I were living. I mean, no one wants to do that.
Right.
It was unforeseen. Construction took longer than we thought. We had a hiccup with our local government here where we didn't get a permit, blah, blah, blah. That's too long to talk about the specifics there. But that sucked, you know? No one wants to do that. A global pandemic happened in our second year of business. Like there no one could, that's a hurdle that no one could see coming. And I did get used to writing grant requests, something I never thought I would do.
Yeah.
I think the biggest hurdle, and maybe getting back to your original question, I always tell people, as a small business owner, you have to be an expert in like too many fields for you to actually be an expert in. So what you got to be good at is, one, asking questions, being able to be wrong or being able to be ignorant, which is not something that's easy usually for people who have the personality to be small business owners. But two, you got to be able to bullshit really well, and don't be afraid of that.
That's a technical term now. That's actually been cataloged as that's actually a unit of measurement as well. How much you actually dish out.
I mean, you just got to do stuff. Don't be afraid that you're not an expert in real estate law or whatever. Like you're gonna have to read over, the lease as well as you can and make demands that make sense. Or, you're going to have to Google search for a couple hours about, legal rights for public get-togethers as you're a theater owner. This kind of stuff that you never really think about. Like, no matter what the industry is, there's stuff that you're going to have to do that you're not an expert in. And that's okay. So be willing to ask questions, do the work. But like at the end of the day, sometimes you got to bullshit.
And what else I heard you say, the other thing I heard you say in there was just a teachable spirit, an attitude that says every day something new is going to come and you inherently can't have the answer. We talk about this in my day-to-day in digital marketing with the agency. I talk about this with friends. We're coming back. I feel like at culture, there's some good things happening in general in business and in thought leadership, entrepreneur life. And that is a humility kind of spirit saying, we're going back to bringing in a consultant for that space, right? If you have one, if you can afford that kind of thing, that propensity more than everything's this DIY mad dash to try to do it yourself. And your story is a DIY story, without making it about that piece. I think a lot of what I hear that you did, and I'm looking at kind of the notes, before we talked, and as we're listening to you now, it was Andy putting it together, and all the while being again teachable, flexible, ready to pivot. Here we are talking amidst a pandemic, almost at the year anniversary, if there's such a thing. I don't think you do anniversaries for these, but we're about to clock a year, and Grey Duck's open. You've found ways to write it out, as they say, right? Where if we, and another conversation could be about the multiplex or cineplex model has a few weeks to ride these things out. And a lot of ways you've crafted what you've done, I think, is utterly fascinating to entrepreneurs now looking at investing in folks like you. I think younger audience listening, finishing in the middle of college, are thinking, I love events. I can also do this. I've curated experiences. I love film. And they're encouraged by Andy Smith's story that, you're showing the humility that stress builds up, that you need to be able to be teachable. And like you said, look for a way that you can, offload the stress and be ready to deal with something that you probably have no idea about. And that, I think that mix, as you're talking, is one of the more unsung songs, right? The untold story of the somewhat lonely life, right, of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The visuals on the outside, you own a business. It's a theater. That's cool. All true. As we're putting up some imagery again of your theater in the early days, one that sticks with me is you made it, I think, into a publication of sorts, Andy, but I remember the image because we were in touch then of you making some kind of wild hair road trip to go pick up theater seats. And talk to me about that vignette moment as one of the final stories as we're sort of wrapping up, because to me, that picture of, I don't know if it was hot or cold outside, but you physically lifting those things into a U-Haul and driving across the country, that really to me separates the business owners, the visionaries, from, again, the skeptics and people that can read about this in a textbook. Tell everybody that story, because that's an interesting moment in the pivot for me as the guy watching you going, oh my gosh, this guy's doing this. You know?
Oh, it's crazy. So as I said, a lot of the initial startup cost we rolled into our TI lease here at the beginning at our place. But there are certain things of equipment that I just had to buy, right. With invest money. And
so there wasn't a movie theater chair store down the street, is what you're trying to say.
That's right. Yeah. Amazingly enough, those don't exist. So one of the big ones was chairs, projector, and screen.
Sure.
All of those have crazy, and there's some other ones, but those are the kind of the big three. All those are crazy stories about how we got them and having to figure that out.
No.
But the chairs are the best one. So I'm looking for chairs. eBay, there's weird websites that have like HTML from 1990 that's like theaterseats.com.
Pop-up ads.
Trying to find stuff.
Yeah.
And eventually on eBay, I saw this ad for, I think it was 120 seats of just these gorgeous seats. I'm sure you have a picture that you can show them. They did not look that good at all in the pictures, but I could kind of see the possibility. They were at a community center in a small town in Massachusetts that I'm forgetting the name of right now, about an hour north of Boston. And they were
Massachusetts. We apologize. We don't mean any derogatory sense at all that we forget a somewhat forgettable town. So to mass listeners, we're so sorry.
I should remember. It's on the website. Oh well. But it had actually been in this community center since the 1930s, at least as far as we know, right? I can't verify that at all, but that's what the seller was verifying, and the seats check out based on how they're built. Anyway, they were great. We wanted them. Bid it on them, talked to the guy, got it done, we bought them. But they were rehabbing the space and had to get rid of them by a certain date that was like 3 weeks from when we bought them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big purchase. And so I didn't want to spend any money. So I bought a red-eye flight from the Twin Cities to Boston, rented a U-Haul at Boston International Airport. So I fly overnight. I didn't want to pay for a hotel. So I like 12 until like 5 a.m. Got there at 5 a.m. Got the U-Haul, drive it north, got to the church. And when I get there, the guy had told me that a couple people were going to be there to help us load up. And apparently that was not true. It was just me and this older man. And there are very heavy seats crowding the, hundreds of chairs into the people I'm probably looking at a picture right now, like sky high into this 15-foot U-Haul.
Yes.
Close it up. And then me by myself drove it to Detroit, where I have family. The closest family I have on that side of the country is in Detroit. So I think I made it as far as Cleveland before I like collapsed and had to sleep a couple hours in the car, like at a rest stop, and then continued on, got to Detroit, and then the next day continued and got it all the way here to Rochester and put it in the back of the theater, again with just me and I think my brother-in-law, who always brings up how hard that was, just the two of us, because it was real hard.
Is there a moment where you're telling yourself, I'm crazy?
24-hour turnaround.
Yeah, I'm insane. I'm in this U-Haul. I'm tired. There's no fan club applauding me, right? There's no reward at that point. What was keeping you going? Were you so driven by the vision of the theater? Was this more about you didn't even know, you were just blind with the drive and the passion? Because I can relate to kind of either one, right? When you're just going through the motions, what was keeping you going at that kind of a moment?
Yeah, so I'm a very specific moment. It was that moment I mentioned in just outside of Cleveland.
Yeah.
Like if you've ever been in a U-Haul, they're not made for you to lay out in. Like I was like snaked around like the shifter in the middle and then the two kind of seats that I'm trying to lay out in some comfortable position. That there's no way I could have slept except when I was exhausted. But like you said, that drive, I remember the overall emotion I had was just the excitement that this was real. Because that was the first like big purchase we had made. We were still waiting for a lot of like the improvements to take place in the area, so it didn't look real. And then I had these seats, right, that needed a lot of work, but it was real and it was real tangible. And so the passion has to be there for those dark moments. So that when you have those, you still have that feeling of, yes, this is real, and the excitement, even in the midst of like, pretty terrible position as far as, what I'm actually doing. But that's the memory I have, and knowing that like this was something that was, I was supposed to be doing, that was good that I was doing.
I love it. And while I've got you warmed up to this moment cerebrally, what, in a sentence, what is your advice and encouragement to maybe a younger audience, maybe not, maybe twice your age, someone looking to make a similar pivot? What would you encourage them? How would you encourage them in your own words? What would you say, whether that's technical advice, right? Go get funding from Chase Bank, or it's follow your dreams. But what do you feel like is the most helpful thing to throw out, as hard of a question as that is, to somebody looking specifically to get away from one thing and go into another? But I'd say even film, because I think a lot of folks today are hearing you going, that's a model I want to do in my city, right? Which I'm sure you would be you'd be excited to hear somebody's hearing this, watching this, going, you're my idol, man. That's great. And I want you to have a moment to speak to them if they're listening.
Yeah, I'll take that little bit at the end first, because that's an easier thing. I'm going to have a whole discussion about the movie industry and what I believe it's going. A lot of people talk about movies dying. I think, kind of what I talked about before, it's the megaplex version of the movie theater that is going to die, and my version of the movie theater that is going to spring up everywhere. I'm not doing this for nostalgia. I'm doing this to be innovative. I think the micro cinema movement is an innovation on movies. That is how people are going to want to experience them. Because I love Netflix, I love streaming services, but it isn't the same as that experience of going to the movies.
Yeah, I agree.
I can talk all about that as I want, but that's if someone specifically is thinking about micro cinemas or that kind of thing, that's, I think, the mindset is like that we are going to be the future of movies, because people still will always want to go to the movies. The example I always use is everyone can cook food at their own house, but there are thousands of restaurants in the world. And I think the same thing is going to be true of visual entertainment. Anyone can watch YouTube and Netflix at their house now, which is great. I actually think it's going to help that we have more smaller places that can house theaters. I think it'll expand people's horizons.
Sure.
So I have a longer spiel on that, but that's kind of the little thing.
You should blog on that. You can link it to our site. How about that? Blog on it, and I'll make sure we get it backlinked. Yeah.
We'll get there. For a broader thing, I mean, I think the most broad thing that I can say is you'll survive. Like, I remember, especially when I was thinking I wasn't going to work in the church, which I had gone to school for 6 years. I had 2 degrees in, and I for a second, I struggled with like this purposelessness. Like, what am I going to do? And I think anyone who's been doing something and is going to switch to something else is going to struggle with that. But now on the other side, like, it was hard, but it's such a healthy decision. Not just that I'm doing what I'm doing now, which I like. Even if the business had, failed, which was very possible early on in COVID, I still think it was the right choice. Like, that's not where my passion was. That's not what I wanted. And yet you only got one shot at this whole life thing. So, I was also a caveat also, like, I was very privileged in the fact that I had no student loans, a broad spectrum of things. I'm a white man, which makes it easier for me to get loans. Like, there's all kinds of things we could talk about that help. So I don't want to get the pressure of everyone needs to do, what they can do. Some people are, where they're at, and that's okay. But for those people who want to do that, like, you are able to make that change. You'll survive. And even if you change and it fails, I think you'll still be happy on the other side that you didn't just kind of stay in a rut when you felt it was a rut.
So in closing, I'm going to say your Mia in the La La Land analogy was the seminary, was a viable, you'd invested, right? All that time. And everybody to the left and to the right of you, no metaphor there, was very much expecting the expected thing. And the little bit of the, that was felt in that movie, right? Like, oh man, they missed it. You had to work through that. And you had to go through the anxiety, the stress. But at the end of that movie, I think you and I both agree, there's a grin the two characters have. Me and Sebastian look at each other and there's a longing, there's just a rush. And actually the director did I think a marvelous job cutting to this very two-dimensional montage thing, and it's song and dance, and it's very Humphrey Bogart, and it's very nostalgic, but it's them kind of going, that would have been, but there's still a little bit of a, it's going to be okay, kind of like a grin. I love the way it closes, and I don't disagree with people who don't like it, and that's okay. If you want the hero to win, that's not your movie. So that's your story. Here you are with it's okay to overgeneralize a very complex time in your life where you said, I'm going to go this way. And you're basically saying it'll be okay. You'll survive. Hang in there with if you are following the true passion and true dream, like we see, Sebastian and Mia in that story. I think the undertone, and I'm curious what your ultimate and in conclusion, your feedback on that point is if folks do make that hard pivot, sever, follow the dream, go through that up and down of the critics in your life, or not maybe even so much that, maybe it's just your own self, I think is the worst, the remorse, right, of making the decision, making the pivot. And you're always having to let go of the fact that was my life. I put 6 years, 10 years. I mean, for some people listening, Andy, and I'm meeting folks routinely that are 30 years into a career going, I think I have another passion. And how exciting to hear your story and for them to go, whether this young man, Andy Smith, is younger than me, my senior, it's an encouragement because I think you were true to yourself. I see you are smiling. You're a bright, enthusiastic individual. You're passionate about film, about community. And yeah, I want to give you the final word here, but I really have to crack up. You brought up La La Land, not me. And that I think is the metaphor here is you kind of, that was your Mia, and the jazz club is your Great Duck Theater, man. What do you think of that? Yeah. I'm stretching here maybe, so.
No, I don't think so. That is exactly what I take from that film, is that's what could have been if they stayed together, but they both chose not to be together and went after their dreams, and they're okay with that. And both things are good, and both have some sadness in them. And that's how life is. I started this business, but, like I said, I have struggled with mental health more than I had before, or I had to drive overnight from, Boston to here. There's always give and takes.
Sure.
But I do think that going after that dream is worth it. So yeah, I buy into the analogy. Yes.
Oh, tremendous. GrayDuckTheater.com. Grey Duck Theater is the business. Visit the website, check them out. If you're driving and listening, Don't do any such thing. When you get home and you can safely visit the website, check out all the Grey Duck Theater is doing. Andy, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me, for taking 40 some odd minutes out of your day. And again, thanks for saluting earlier on with your business chat mug, the typo mugs.
That's right.
So a final virtual cheers to you, my friend.
There we go. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad you're doing this. And thank you so much.
We will be in touch. Thanks so much, Andy. Take care.